Let me say something most men don't want to hear, and nobody says it out loud. You weren't placed in that avoidance life by accident. And no, it wasn't because you were too nice, too emotional, or too available. Sit with me for a second. Because if you're being honest, deep down, you already know something felt off. From the very beginning, it felt like you were doing emotional push-ups while they were watching from a distance. You were showing up, opening up, adjusting, explaining, and trying to make things feel safe, while they stayed just far enough to breathe. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Your role in their life was never about staying forever. It was about revealing something they've spent their entire life avoiding. Most men think, if I just love harder, if I stay consistent, if I prove myself, they'll finally relax. That belief keeps you stuck, keeps you confused, and it keeps you blaming yourself. But what if I told you that your presence wasn't meant to heal them, it was meant to expose them? Avoidants don't fear love the way people think. They fear what love demands after the honeymoon fades: vulnerability, accountability, emotional availability, and consistency. And when a man like you enters their life, grounded, intentional, emotionally present, it activates pressure they can't explain. Not because you did something wrong, but because you did something right. You represented emotional depth they hadn't developed yet. And here's the controversial part most men resist. You were chosen because you could handle truth, not because you could handle pain. Your role wasn't to stay and suffer. Your role was to show them what real connection looks like, even if they couldn't keep it. That's why the connection felt intense. That's why the pull felt magnetic. And that's why the ending felt abrupt, confusing, or cold. This video isn't about blaming avoidance. And it's definitely not about shaming you. It's about helping you understand why you were placed in that situation, what it reveals about you, and why this experience was never meant to break you, but to upgrade the way you choose, lead, and walk away. If you've ever asked yourself, why did I come into their life at all? Stay with me, because the answer might change how you see yourself forever. Let me start this the same way I'd say it if you were sitting right next to me. Have you noticed that the more calm you became, the more uneasy they got? The more grounded you were, the more distant they became? That wasn't random. That wasn't bad timing. And it definitely wasn't you being too much. You were an emotional mirror. And avoidants hate mirrors. Here's why this matters for you as a man. An avoidant can handle chaos. They can handle inconsistency. They can handle surface-level connection. What they struggle with is emotional clarity. When you show up steady, present, and intentional, it forces them to see themselves clearly, and that's uncomfortable. Think about it. You weren't asking for drama. You weren't demanding perfection. You just wanted honesty, effort, and emotional presence. And that alone created pressure. Not pressure to perform, pressure to feel. Avoidants survive by disconnecting from their inner world. They learned early on that needing people came with disappointment, loss of control, or emotional overwhelm. So they adapted. They became independent, self-reliant, emotionally guarded. And that strategy worked, until someone like you entered their life. Because you didn't come with chaos. You came with consistency. And consistency exposes everything. When you're emotionally available, you highlight their emotional absence. When you communicate clearly, you expose their avoidance. When you stay grounded during conflict, you reveal how much they shut down. That's why they started pulling away when things became real, not when things were bad. This is where men often get it twisted. You think, if I just explain myself better, they'll understand. You think, if I give them space, they'll come back calmer. You think, if I stay patient, they'll eventually open up. But mirrors don't comfort people who don't want to look. Your presence didn't make them feel loved. It made them feel seen. And being seen requires emotional courage they haven't built yet. Here's the controversial truth. You didn't trigger their wounds. You revealed them. That's why they could be warm one moment and cold the next. That's why intimacy felt deep, then suddenly shallow. That's why they'd pull back right after connection instead of leaning in. It wasn't confusion. It was emotional overload. And no amount of reassurance from you could fix that, because the discomfort wasn't about you. It was about the gap between who they present themselves to be and who they actually are emotionally. This is where men need to wake up. If your calm energy makes someone anxious, if your consistency makes someone distant, if your emotional presence makes someone feel trapped, that's not a signal to shrink. That's information. You weren't placed in their life to dim yourself so they could feel comfortable. You were placed there to show them what emotional availability looks like in real time, even if they couldn't handle it. And here's the part most men miss. A mirror doesn't chase. A mirror doesn't convince. A mirror simply reflects, and lets the other person decide what to do with the truth. You didn't fail. You fulfilled your role. And once that role was complete, the dynamic had nowhere else to go. In the next section, we'll talk about something even more uncomfortable. Why you were never meant to fix them, no matter how capable you felt. And that one changes how you show up in every relationship after this. Let me be very direct with you here, because this is where most men get stuck. You didn't enter that avoidance life to heal them. You entered their life to show them the edge of what they can emotionally handle. And that's a hard pill to swallow. As men, we're wired to solve problems. When something isn't working, we lean in harder. We communicate more clearly. We become more patient. We tell ourselves, if I stay solid, if I stay calm, if I stay consistent, this will stabilize. But emotional avoidance doesn't work that way. Avoidants don't shut down because you didn't love them enough. They shut down because intimacy stretches them beyond their emotional capacity. Think about that for a second. Every time you asked for clarity, you weren't asking for too much. You were asking for more than they had access to. Every time you wanted consistency, you weren't being demanding. You were brushing up against their internal ceiling. Every time you tried to fix the disconnect, you were unknowingly highlighting a limitation they couldn't admit. And instead of saying, I don't know how to show up the way you need, they did what avoidants do best. They withdrew. Here's the controversial truth most men resist. Your strength didn't save the relationship. It accelerated the ending. Why? Because the stronger and clearer you became, the more obvious it was that they couldn't meet you there. Men often confuse emotional patience with emotional self-abandonment. You told yourself you were being understanding, but deep down, you were slowly negotiating your standards. You explained things that didn't need explaining. You tolerated emotional distance that didn't align with who you are. And the reason you stayed? Because you believed your role was to fix, not to observe. But avoidants don't need fixing. They need awareness. And awareness is uncomfortable. Your presence exposed that no amount of time, chemistry, or attraction could bypass emotional work they hadn't done. And instead of rising to meet that reality, they retreated into what felt familiar, emotional distance. This is where the power shift happens, if you let it. The moment you realize it was never your responsibility to heal someone who hasn't chosen growth, you stop chasing closure. You stop replaying conversations. You stop asking yourself what you could have done differently. Because the truth is, you didn't leave too soon. You didn't stay too long. You stayed until the truth became undeniable. And here's the wake-up moment for men. If someone requires you to shrink, wait, or carry the emotional load alone just to keep the connection alive, that connection is already operating past its limit. You weren't meant to fix them. You were meant to find the boundary of what they can offer, and decide if that's enough for you. In the next section, we'll talk about something even deeper. Why your stability felt threatening to them, and why that had nothing to do with commitment and everything to do with control. That's where things really start to click. Let me talk to you like a man who's lived this. You weren't unstable. You weren't unpredictable. You weren't emotionally all over the place. And that's exactly why they felt uncomfortable. To you, stability feels safe. Feels grown. Feels like peace. But to an avoidant, stability can feel like loss of control. Not because they don't want connection, but because deep down, they associate consistency with expectation. And expectation feels dangerous to them. You noticed it in small ways. The more reliable you became, the more distant they got. The clearer your intentions were, the more vague theirs became. The more secure the connection felt to you, the more they started creating space. And you probably asked yourself, why does it feel like I'm being punished for doing things right? Here's the truth. Stability removes escape routes. When things are calm, there's nowhere to hide. No drama to blame. No chaos to point at. Just two people and the emotional responsibility that comes with real connection. And for someone who's built their identity around independence and emotional distance, that can feel suffocating. Not because you were controlling, but because your presence made emotional avoidance harder. You didn't demand daily reassurance. You didn't need constant validation. You simply showed up with consistency. And that consistency quietly said, "This is real." That's when the internal alarm goes off for avoidance. Real connection requires showing up even when it's uncomfortable. It requires vulnerability without guarantees. And stability brings all of that to the surface. It asks questions they don't know how to answer yet. So instead of leaning in, they pull back. Instead of communicating, they go quiet. Instead of deepening the bond, they create distance. And here's the part that hits home for most men. You stayed grounded while they oscillated. You stayed steady while they questioned everything. You stayed emotionally available while they stayed emotionally protected. That imbalance creates exhaustion. Not because you're weak, but because you were carrying something that was meant to be shared. You weren't asking for perfection. You were asking for participation. And that's where the disconnect lived. Avoidance often mistakes stability for obligation. They fear that once things settle, they'll lose themselves, lose freedom, or be expected to give more than they're ready to give. So they subconsciously sabotage what feels too secure. Not out of cruelty, out of fear. If this sounds familiar, it's because you lived it. You felt the shift before you understood it. You felt the distance before it was explained. You felt like something was slipping, even when nothing was technically wrong. And here's the grounding truth for you. Your stability wasn't a flaw. It was a filter. It showed you who could meet you in calm, not just chaos. It revealed who had the emotional range for consistency, and who didn't. You didn't represent a trap. You represented a level they weren't ready to stand on. In the next section, we're going to get very honest, especially with men, about why staying too long costs you more than leaving, and what this situation was really trying to teach you before it drained you. That's where the wake-up happens. Let's slow this down for a moment, because this part is where men need honesty, not comfort. You didn't stay because you were blind. You stayed because you believed patience was strength. And in many situations, it is. But here's the hard truth. Patience without boundaries becomes self-betrayal. You weren't placed in that avoidance life to prove how much you could tolerate. You were placed there to learn when to stop negotiating with potential. This is where I'm going to gently challenge you as a man. You noticed the patterns early. The emotional distance. The inconsistency. The way serious conversations never really landed. But instead of taking that information at face value, you translated it into a challenge. You told yourself, if I stay grounded, this will stabilize. You called it maturity. You called it understanding. What it actually was hope overpowering discernment. And that's not a character flaw. It's a common trap. Men often mistake endurance for leadership. You thought staying calm through confusion made you solid. But leadership also means knowing when to walk away from dynamics that quietly erode your self-respect. Here's the uncomfortable part. Every time you explained what shouldn't need explaining, you taught them that minimal effort was enough. Every time you accepted emotional distance without consequence, you trained yourself to tolerate less. Every time you waited for clarity that never came, you delayed your own growth. This isn't about blaming you. It's about waking you up. You weren't meant to be their safe place while abandoning your own standards. You weren't meant to stay long enough to become emotionally numb just to keep the connection alive. The lesson wasn't, be more patient. The lesson was, pay attention sooner. Avoidants don't change because someone stays longer. They change when they face the cost of losing people who were emotionally available and self-respecting. And sometimes you are that cost. Here's the advice part, and hear this clearly. If you have to convince someone to meet you emotionally, they're already telling you they can't. If you feel calmer alone than you do with them, your nervous system is giving you information your mind is ignoring. Being a man doesn't mean absorbing emotional instability quietly. It means choosing environments where your presence is valued, not tolerated. You weren't the destination because destinations require readiness. You were the lesson because lessons arrive when someone isn't prepared to receive more. And once the lesson is delivered, the relationship can't continue the same way. In the final section, we'll talk about the most confronting truth of all, what losing you actually represents for them, and why that realization often comes too late. That's where everything fully comes together. Let me end this part with clarity, not emotion. You weren't difficult. You weren't demanding. You weren't asking for too much. You were asking for real intimacy, and that's exactly what exposed the gap. Real intimacy isn't just chemistry or attraction. It's emotional availability over time. It's consistency when things settle. It's staying present when the excitement fades and life becomes ordinary. And for someone with avoidant patterns, that level of closeness feels threatening, not comforting. That's why the connection felt strong but unstable. That's why moments of closeness were followed by distance. That's why progress never felt secure. You were living in truth. They were living in tolerance. And that difference matters. Here's the controversial truth most men need to hear. Some people don't lose you because you weren't enough. They lose you because you represent something they can't sustain. You showed them what emotional availability looks like in practice. You showed them what it feels like to be seen, supported, and emotionally engaged. And instead of rising to meet that, they retreated to what felt safer, emotional distance and control. Not because they didn't care, but because caring requires capacity. And capacity can't be forced. You might never hear them say it, but your presence left an imprint. Not the kind that leads to immediate growth, but the kind that lingers. The kind that shows up later when surface-level connections stop working, when distractions lose their power, when they realize they keep repeating the same cycle. That's when the awareness hits. Not while you were explaining, not while you were waiting, but after you left. And here's what you need to take with you. You don't measure your worth by who can stay with you. You measure it by who can meet you where you stand without you lowering yourself to be understood. You weren't rejected. You were revealed. You revealed their emotional ceiling. You revealed their readiness. You revealed the work they haven't done. And once that truth is visible, the dynamic can't survive, because real intimacy doesn't allow hiding forever. You didn't lose something rare. You left something incomplete. And that distinction is what frees you. Now, let's bring this all together, because the conclusion is where most people get uncomfortable, and where the real conversation starts. Here's the part most men avoid thinking about, and the truth that will make some of you uncomfortable. You weren't placed in their life to be loved unconditionally. You weren't placed there to fix their emotional gaps. You weren't placed there to suffer silently while they pulled away. You were placed there to see clearly, to witness their limits, to understand their capacity, and most importantly, to recognize your own standards. The controversial truth? Losing you wasn't their loss. It was their revelation. It exposed that they weren't ready for real intimacy, that they couldn't match your consistency, and that their comfort always came at the cost of someone else's emotional well-being. And if that stings, good, it's meant to. Because awareness is uncomfortable before it's empowering. But here's the empowering part for you as a man. You now know your value. You know what emotional presence looks like, both in yourself and in others. You know that someone pulling away in response to your stability isn't a reflection of your weakness. It's a reflection of their unreadiness. I want you to take a moment and think about your own experiences. Reflect on the people who came and went, the connections that fizzled, and the moments when your calm, grounded energy made someone anxious. That isn't failure. That's clarity delivered to your life, and it's something most men never get the chance to recognize. If you've ever gone through this, and I know many of you have, comment below and share your experience. I'll read every story, and I'll reach out to some of you. Let's create a conversation that doesn't just analyze avoidance, but also empowers men to understand themselves and step into relationships with awareness, respect, and self-respect. Because here's the final controversial truth to leave you with. Some people never deserve the real version of you in the first place, and recognizing that sooner, not later, is the ultimate act of self-respect. You were never the problem. You were the proof that emotional availability exists, proof that stability matters, and proof that the right man shows up, even when others can't. Now go take that proof, learn from it, and let it guide every connection you step into moving forward.